Karoline Leavitt never expected her political advocacy to land her in a legal showdown with one of the most powerful judges in the country. But in 2025, that's exactly what happened. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Karoline Levitt, a young but rapidly rising conservative figure, found herself in the middle of an unexpected legal firestorm when Judge John Roberts issued a fine of $50,000 against her. The fine, which many considered unusually severe, came after Levitt made a series of public statements criticizing Roberts and questioning the integrity of certain decisions he had made from the bench. Specifically, during a televised panel discussion, Levitt alleged that Roberts had consistently bent the law to favor political interests and accused him of weaponizing the court to silence voices he doesn't agree with. These remarks quickly gained traction online, drawing praise from some conservative groups and harsh backlash from others. Within days of the broadcast, Levitt was served with a court order. Judge Roberts accused her of spreading false and defamatory information that undermined the credibility of the judiciary. The fine of $50,000 was issued under a rarely used legal mechanism related to contempt and reputational harm to the institution. Legal experts were stunned. While judges can respond to certain public attacks, it's extremely rare for one to personally issue a punitive financial penalty against a private citizen for public speech, especially one not directly involved in an ongoing case. Roberts claimed the fine was necessary to protect the dignity of the court and to send a message that reckless public speech against sitting judges wouldn't be tolerated. But his decision instantly ignited controversy. Critics from across the political spectrum questioned the legal basis of the fine. Was it truly about protecting the judiciary, or was it an attempt to stifle criticism and intimidate a vocal opponent? For Levitt, the move felt deeply personal. She described it as a calculated effort to silence her and discredit her growing influence in political discourse. According to those close to her, she viewed the fine not just as a financial burden, but as an attack on her fundamental right to speak freely about matters of public interest. If a judge can punish a citizen for criticizing him, then what's left of the First Amendment? She reportedly asked during an early interview following the court order. The public reaction was swift and divided. While some supported Roberts' move and believed he was within his rights to defend the court's reputation, a much larger segment saw the fine as a clear example of judicial overreach. Civil liberties organizations began voicing their concern, noting that the precedent being set could have chilling effects on political speech. Conservative commentators rallied to Levitt's side, framing her as a target of establishment retaliation. In this context, the $50,000 fine became more than just a legal issue. It became a symbol of the tension between judicial power and public dissent. And with Judge Roberts, the highest-ranking justice in the nation, at the center of it, the stakes were unusually high. His involvement added significant weight to the matter, and his decision to pursue such a high-profile penalty only increased public scrutiny. Levitt's team quickly moved to contest the fine, arguing that it violated her constitutional rights. But regardless of the legal outcome at that moment, the incident had already raised serious questions about the balance of power, the limits of free speech, and the role of the judiciary in modern political life. The $50,000 fine imposed on Karoline Levitt by Judge John Roberts sent shockwaves through political and legal circles, and many believe the motive behind it was more than just legal. It was deeply political. To Levitt and her supporters, the message behind the fine was unmistakable. Dissent, especially from a prominent conservative voice, would not be tolerated. It wasn't simply about a legal infraction or some obscure rule violation. This was, in the eyes of many, a clear tactic designed to suppress a viewpoint that challenged the establishment. And Judge Roberts was using his powerful position to make an example out of her. At the time of the incident, Levitt had been gaining momentum in conservative media circles. Her commentary was sharp, unapologetic, and often critical of what she saw as elitism within the judicial system, particularly decisions that appeared to favor the political left. In one particular interview that triggered Roberts' reaction, Levitt called out what she referred to as a pattern of ideological interference from the bench, pointing directly to Judge Roberts as someone who had abandoned constitutional principles in favor of political appeasement. Rather than respond with a rebuttal or allow public discourse to play out naturally, Roberts responded with legal action, an unusual choice for a sitting judge, especially one with his high profile. His decision to fine Leavitt, rather than address her criticism through open dialogue or ignore it altogether, raised serious concerns among legal scholars and civil liberties advocates. They questioned whether the fine was really about protecting the judiciary from defamation, or whether it was a calculated move to deter similar public criticism from others. Judge Roberts has long been known for his carefully measured tone and for his efforts to preserve the image of the Supreme Court as an apolitical institution, but his action in this case struck many as overtly personal. By singling out Leavitt, a young and outspoken conservative, and levying a significant financial penalty against her, he crossed into territory that critics said felt more like political retaliation than legal discipline. The optics were troubling. A powerful judge using the force of the court to silence a private citizen who dared to speak critically of him. Legal commentators noted that there was no recent precedent for a Supreme Court justice taking such direct, punitive action against a media figure or political commentator. The fine had a chilling effect, at least momentarily. Commentators, journalists, and political figures took notice. The message seemed clear. Criticize Judge Roberts and there could be consequences. This was especially unsettling in a country where freedom of speech is supposed to be protected, even, perhaps especially, when that speech is controversial or uncomfortable for those in power. Leavitt didn't interpret the fine as a routine legal matter. In her public statements afterward, she framed it as a direct attempt to intimidate her and send a warning to others in the conservative movement. She referred to it as an authoritarian move dressed in legal robes, suggesting that Roberts had weaponized his office to protect his personal reputation at the expense of constitutional freedoms. Her reaction quickly galvanized public opinion. Conservative media outlets highlighted the incident as evidence of bias within the judiciary. They painted Roberts not as a neutral arbiter of the law, but as an active participant in a broader effort to marginalize opposing viewpoints. The backlash wasn't limited to partisan corners. Even some moderate voices expressed discomfort with the idea of a judge using financial penalties to push back against political criticism. The case became a national flashpoint, with Roberts' actions scrutinized not just as a legal matter, but as a potential abuse of influence. What could have remained a quiet legal dispute instead erupted into a full-blown public controversy over power, speech, and the very role of judges in political discourse. Karoline Leavitt's response to the $50,000 fine from Judge John Roberts was anything but quiet compliance. Instead of retreating or settling the issue privately, she saw the penalty as a defining moment, not just for her own career but for the larger fight over free speech and institutional accountability. From the moment the fine was announced, Leavitt made it clear she would not be silenced. She publicly rejected the idea of paying a single cent, calling the fine unconstitutional and accusing Roberts of trying to suppress political dissent through judicial intimidation. Rather than allowing the story to fade from public view, Leavitt took it directly to the national stage. She launched a fundraising campaign to support her legal defense, but that campaign quickly evolved into something much larger. It became a platform to spotlight what she, and many of her supporters, saw as a growing trend. Powerful institutions, including parts of the judiciary, acting against citizens who challenge the prevailing narrative. Within hours of her announcement, conservative media outlets picked up the story, and Leavitt became a centerpiece in a debate about judicial overreach and First Amendment rights. Judge Roberts, a figure typically known for his discretion and minimal public engagement, now found himself at the center of a very public controversy. Leavitt was not just contesting the fine in court, she was challenging the legitimacy of Roberts' decision in the court of public opinion. On cable news, shows and social media posts and through op-eds, she framed the incident as a turning point in the fight to preserve free expression. Her messaging was clear and direct. If a sitting judge could financially punish a citizen for criticism, what protections truly remained for political speech in America? As the controversy grew, so did the support for Leavitt. Prominent voices in conservative politics began to rally behind her. Members of Congress spoke out, calling the fine unprecedented and dangerous. Legal experts, even those who didn't necessarily share Leavitt's political views, began to examine whether Judge Roberts had acted within his authority. The general consensus was that the use of judicial power in this instance was not only unusual but potentially unconstitutional. Leavitt used every opportunity to amplify this argument. In interviews, she spoke less about herself and more about the broader implications of the case. She reminded the public that freedom of speech was not just a slogan. It was a right protected by the Constitution, one that could not be selectively applied. She often referred to Roberts by name, stating that his decision to fine her was not a neutral act of justice, but a deliberate attempt to send a warning. "This isn't about law," she said during one interview. "It's about control." Her refusal to pay the fine and her public campaign sparked a legal chain reaction. Constitutional lawyers offered their services pro bono, believing that the case had the potential to set a dangerous precedent if left unchallenged. Several civil liberties organizations began filing amicus briefs in support of Leavitt, and a formal motion was filed questioning the constitutionality of the fine. What had started as a punitive action against one individual was now turning into a full-scale legal and political confrontation. Roberts, perhaps underestimating the public and legal response, remained mostly silent throughout the early stages. But the growing pressure could not be ignored. Leavitt's actions had brought unprecedented scrutiny to one of the country's most influential judges. In defying his fine, she had not only protected her own rights but had forced a nationwide discussion about the limits of judicial power and the essential nature of dissent in a free society. The legal tide began to shift when Karoline Leavitt's legal team formally challenged the $50,000 fine imposed by Judge John Roberts. What initially seemed like a straightforward enforcement of judicial authority quickly unraveled under deeper scrutiny. Constitutional lawyers, media analysts, and civil rights advocates began to raise serious concerns about the legal foundation of the penalty. Leavitt's legal counsel argued that the fine was not only excessive, but represented a direct violation of her First Amendment rights. They claimed that Roberts had acted outside the scope of his judicial responsibilities by issuing a punitive fine in response to political speech made in a non-court setting. The court reviewing the case examined the facts carefully. It became clear that Leavitt had not violated any court order, disrupted legal proceedings, or engaged in any form of slander that rose to the level of legal action. Her statements, while critical and pointed, were made in public forums, interviews, panel discussions, and opinion pieces, none of which were directly connected to any case Roberts was presiding over. This distinction became crucial. Judges do have tools to manage contempt within their courtrooms, but Roberts' action was unusual in that it extended beyond the courtroom into the realm of public political discourse. After several weeks of mounting legal pressure, the court overseeing the appeal issued its ruling. The fine was unlawful. The decision was firm and unequivocal. The $50,000 penalty, the court said, constituted an overreach of judicial authority and lacked sufficient legal grounding. The court emphasized that public criticism of judges, even when harsh, is protected speech under the U.S. Constitution. In their analysis, the reviewing judges made it clear that holding a judicial position does not place someone above public accountability or criticism. This ruling was not just a win for Karoline Leavitt. It was a rebuke of Judge John Roberts. For someone with his stature and reputation, the implications were significant. The decision cast doubt on his judgment and called into question his ability to separate personal reactions from professional responsibilities. Legal scholars began debating whether Roberts had crossed ethical lines. Some argued that while he had every right to disagree with Leavitt's comments, turning that disagreement into a financial punishment showed a troubling misuse of power. Following the ruling, judicial watchdog groups filed formal complaints, prompting a broader review of Roberts' conduct. The review committee, composed of senior legal figures, concluded that while Roberts had not committed a removable offense, his actions had damaged public trust in the neutrality of the judiciary. As a result, the committee issued a formal censure, a rare and public reprimand against a sitting justice. Though it carried no direct legal penalty, the censure marked a blemish on Roberts' otherwise carefully managed legacy. Leavitt responded with a measured statement, expressing gratitude for the ruling and reaffirming her belief in the strength of the Constitution. But the larger impact of the situation couldn't be ignored. Her case had not only nullified the fine, but it had also sparked national dialogue about the limits of judicial authority and the importance of protecting free speech, even when that speech targets the judiciary. For Roberts, the fallout was significant. His name, once synonymous with restraint and moderation, had become linked to overreach and controversy. The legal community, the media, and the public began to view him through a new lens, one shaped by a moment where, rather than uphold the principles of free expression, he had tried to suppress them. Leavitt, in turning the tables, had not only defended herself, but had forced accountability at the highest levels of the legal system. Karoline Leavitt's confrontation with Judge John Roberts became more than just a headline. It evolved into a defining moment in the ongoing debate about power, speech, and accountability in American democracy. What began as a $50,000 fine, meant to suppress a critical voice, ended in a legal and public reckoning that exposed the potential dangers of unchecked authority, even within the judiciary. Leavitt's resistance, her refusal to be silenced, and her ability to rally both legal experts and public opinion showed that even individuals outside the traditional power structure can hold institutions accountable. Her victory in court was not just personal vindication, it was a reaffirmation of the First Amendment in its purest form. The idea that public figures, including judges, are not immune from criticism is fundamental to a functioning democracy. Roberts' decision to fine Leavitt attempted to blur the line between judicial integrity and personal sensitivity, but the court's reversal firmly reestablished that no one, regardless of title or influence, can shield themselves from scrutiny through the misuse of legal authority. The broader significance of this case is that it set a precedent, not just legally, but culturally. It reminded the public that the judicial system is not above challenge, and that the checks and balances built into the U.S. Constitution are not theoretical. They are real tools that citizens can use to protect their rights. Leavitt's case became a rallying point for those concerned about creeping censorship and the silencing of dissenting views, especially when that censorship originates from powerful institutions. Judge Roberts, once seen as a guardian of judicial neutrality, now finds his legacy complicated by this episode. While his long tenure on the bench is marked by many notable rulings, this incident will remain a permanent footnote, an example of how even seasoned figures can misjudge the moment and the principles at stake. The formal censure, though symbolic, was a necessary act of accountability, serving as a reminder that power must always be exercised with restraint and responsibility. For Leavitt, this chapter solidified her status as more than a political commentator. It positioned her as a voice for constitutional rights and civic courage. By challenging Roberts publicly and legally, she demonstrated that standing up to authority is not only possible, but necessary when the principles of democracy are threatened. Her stance inspired others to speak out and reminded many Americans that the fight to preserve freedom of speech requires vigilance and resolve. In the end, this story wasn't just about a fine, a judge, or a political figure. It was about the enduring strength of democratic values in the face of institutional pressure. Karoline Leavitt turned an attempt to silence her into an opportunity to strengthen the very freedoms that define the American experiment. And through that, she not only cleared her name, she helped reassert the fundamental truth that in this country, no voice should be punished simply for speaking out.